Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Greetings, my name is Charles Upton. This video is entitled The Alien Disclosure Deception, a Challenge to the Stars Academy. It will serve to introduce my new book, The Alien Disclosure Deception, the Metaphysics of Social Engineering. Sophia Prentice, 2021. Available through Amazon. I believe that the UFO phenomenon is real, inexplicable according to contemporary science, and most likely of paranormal origin. But the dominant myth of UFOs and their alien occupants, which is now coming to light through the apparent triumph of the alien disclosure movement, is so full of implausible elements, contradictions, and outright deceptions that no well-informed and rational human being could see it as anything other than a deliberate hoax. Clear evidence for this hoax is presented in my book. This does not mean, however, that those purveying the deception are necessarily the authors of it. Some may simply be innocent dupes. Be that as it may, I believe that the alien disclosure deception can and should be investigated, at least up to a point, independently of the question of what UFOs actually are, whatever they are, and whether or not they can be proved to be either extraterrestrial or paranormal. Deception is deception. The leading institution in the alien disclosure movement at this point in time appears to be the To the Stars Academy, headed by rock star and successful entrepreneur Tom DeLonge. TTSA is dedicated to three activities: collecting information on UFOs, turning this information somehow into cutting-edge technology, and sponsoring creative and artistic projects to spread the UFO gospel. It includes people like Luis Elizondo, a military intelligence officer turned UFO missionary who claims to have headed the Pentagon's covert Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program and who acts as TTSA's main public spokesman. Peter Levenda, a writer on conspiracy theories, magic, and occult subjects, and at least two ex-employees of the CIA. Dr. Norman Kahn, formerly of the CIA Counter-Biological Weapons Program, with 30 years of experience with the agency, and Jim Semivan, 25 years as operations officer for the CIA's Directorate of Operations and Intelligence Community, later a consultant for training and leadership, CIA tradecraft, and countering weapons of mass destruction. However, according to an article by Keith Kluwer posted on the Intercept website on June 1st, 2019, there is no discernible evidence that Luis Elizondo ever worked for a government UFO program, much less led one. Close quote. While Jim Semivan, a consultant in spycraft, could accurately be described as, among other things, a professional teacher of deception. Because that's what spies do. To the Stars Academy website informs us as follows. TTSA collects documents and physical materials from public and private sources related to the UFO phenomenon to study it, and then transitions transformative technologies behind it to wider applications of public benefit. The ADAM Research Project at TTSA Enterprise focuses on the collection and scientific evaluation of material samples obtained through reliable reports of advanced aerospace vehicles of unknown origin. That's what it says on the website. So we have apparently reliable reports of vehicles, but do we have the vehicles themselves? And if not, why not? What we reportedly have are material samples of unknown or speculative origin. But when a new drug is submitted to the FDA for approval, how should we expect them to react if those offering the pharmaceutical in question explain that they might know actually produced it, or that they have heard plausible stories regarding its origin, stories that they tend to believe? When a patent application for a new material is submitted to the U.S. Patent Office, should we expect them to look favorably on the case if no one knows exactly who invented this material or how it was produced? Maybe so. After all, Elizabeth Holmes Theranos Corporation, attracted nearly $1 billion in venture capital on the basis of zero hard evidence to develop a cutting-edge blood testing technology that never existed. Nonetheless, a news item on the TTSA website reads as follows. San Diego, October 17th, 2019. To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences, TTSA, announced today a Cooperative Research and Development Agreement, CRADA, with the U.S. Army Combat Capabilities Development Command to advance TTSA's material and technology innovations in order to develop enhanced capabilities for Army ground vehicles. What are we to make of this? Maybe the Army simply doesn't care whether new defensive or weapons technologies were given to us or inadvertently left behind for us by the space aliens. As long as they work. If they are useful, if they are effective, why quibble about their origin? Of course, the U.S. Army Combat Capabilities Development Command may be in on an alien disclosure deception themselves, but even if they aren't, their name has nonetheless been appropriated to advance the disclosure myth. Their involvement with TTSA suggests that the claims by Tom DeLonge, Luis Elizondo, and their colleagues that they possess recovered UFO materials are genuine, while providing us with absolutely no factual evidence that this is so. Only rumors and hearsay. Be that as it may, a real physical material or device with unexplained properties and capacities will work much more powerfully to command belief, especially among nuts and bolts science and engineering types, than the kind of fascinating words and images that appeal to mystical and artistic types such as myself. The use of advanced technologies unknown to the general public to suggest paranormal powers has a long history behind it. To take one example, when stage magicians first encountered demonstrations of magic lanterns, primitive motion picture projectors, in the salons of Paris or the clubs of London, they realized that such demonstrations could be sold as real magic in the rural provinces among the rustic hicks who had never seen or imagined such devices. Are we now the rustic hicks of the 21st century? To invoke the paranormal hypothesis for a moment, I want to make clear that I do not absolutely deny the possibility that elements of our contemporary high technology might come from beings now known as the aliens. American Eastern Orthodox priest Seraphim Rose, for example, was of the opinion that the powers of the air, those beings whom the Christians call the demons and the Muslims the Jinn, have technological capabilities of their own, and it may indeed be that these entities have at least inspired some of our modern high technology. Nonetheless, if To the Stars claims that various materials in their possession came from a crashed UFO, I challenge them to produce that vehicle. In this world of the strange and the inexplicable, it is certainly strange and inexplicable to me that they haven't done so already, unless the real explanation is that the technology necessary to create such a crashed vehicle, as with Elizabeth Holmes' blood testing device, hasn't quite materialized yet. If To the Stars is unable or unwilling to either produce an actual crashed UFO or else clearly explained how it can transform, quote, documents and physical materials from public and private sources related to the UAP UFO phenomenon, the material samples having been obtained through reliable reports of advanced aerospace vehicles of unknown origin, how they can transform that into, quote, wider applications of public benefit, then they can in no way expect us to accept any of their claims as inherently credible, especially in view of the fact that we do not know for certain if human contact with extraterrestrial biological entities has even taken place, or if human beings have actually taken possession of recovered technology and or material from extraterrestrial vehicles. None of this has been established. Rosie Perper, for one, in a Business Insider article posted on October 24th, 2019, informs us that, quote, Edward Snowden said he couldn't find any evidence that the government was hiding aliens when he searched through CIA databases. If private venture capitalists want to risk investing in technologies that may or may not even exist, as they did with Theranos, that is their right. But when TTSA sells goods or services to the U.S. Army that are to be paid for by our tax dollars, then we have the right, and I would maintain the duty, to demand that they demonstrate that those goods and services are actually available, that they're actually real. Once again, due diligence requires us to challenge the To the Stars Academy to prove its claims that the materials or technologies in its possession are of extraterrestrial origin. There may be legitimate reasons for keeping a crashed space vehicle under wraps, national security, for example, or the need to guard proprietary technology. But if To the Stars, due to these or other considerations, is unable to produce a single shred of concrete evidence to support their claims, then we are certainly not required to accord them a single shred of credence or trust. I've recently been in dialogue with Peter Levenda of TTSA on the subject of my analysis of the Netflix original series Top Secret UFO Projects Declassified, premiered August 2021, which I see as a piece of rather shoddily designed propaganda, but one that has the virtue of bringing together in one place all the major elements of the UFO myth that has been introduced into American society by the social engineers since World War II, making it much easier for the analyst to expose the deceptions that compose it. For example, it recounts a claim by researcher Rob Mercer that, in response to an ad in a local newspaper, he took possession free of charge of a cache of classified documents stored in the garage of a former employee of Wright-Patterson Air Base in Ohio, a man who took no pains to conceal his identity. The cache supposedly contained all the UFO accounts that had been collected by but later excluded from Project Blue Book. It also includes the tale told by Colonel Philip J. Corso of the time in 1947 when, motivated purely by curiosity, he started poking around in a secret shipment that had arrived at Fort Riley, Kansas, where he was stationed, pried open a wooden packing crate chosen at random, and discovered an alien corpse lying loose in the container, unguarded and with no precautions taken for its preservation. Obviously, neither of these stories makes one bit of sense. Whatever UFOs are, look at these stories. They're absurd. They could not be true. Mr. Levenda's trilogy, Sinister Forces, in a moment. Mr. Levenda's trilogy, Sinister Forces, a grimoire of American political witchcraft. It's a great title. Sinister Forces, a grimoire of American political witchcraft, has been immensely helpful to me in discerning the outlines of a large-scale and long-term social engineering agenda built around the UFO phenomenon, for which he provides much evidence. For example, he quotes a speech given by General Douglas MacArthur to the cadets at West Point on May 12, 1962, and I checked it out. It does indeed exist. And one of the things that MacArthur said in his speech was as follows: "We deal now not with the things of this world alone, but with the illimitable distances and as yet unfathomed mysteries of the universe, of ultimate conflict between a united human race and the sinister forces of some other planetary galaxy, of such dreams and fantasies as to make life the most interesting of times. And through all this welter of change and development, your mission remains fixed, determined, inviolable. It is to win our wars." Okay. Everyone who is interested in either UFOs or the subject of social engineering should buy and read Sinister Forces. Strangely enough, however, Mr. Levenda told me that he does not share the conclusions that I myself have drawn from his writings. In Sinister Forces, Levenda tells the story of the first two major UFO sightings of the post-war era, that by Kenneth Arnold while piloting his aircraft near Mount Rainier, and that by Harold Dahl from his boat moored at Maury Island in Puget Sound. In a very interesting sequel to these events, Dahl's boss, Fred Chrisman, contacted Raymond Palmer, editor of Amazing Stories magazine, with Dahl's account of the Maury Island encounter, but not before Palmer himself got in touch with Kenneth Arnold about the Mount Rainier sightings. Palmer suggested that Arnold meet with Dahl. The meeting took place in Tacoma on July 30th, 1947. When Dahl arrived in Tacoma, he found that no hotel rooms were available, except for a room in the most expensive hotel in town that had been already reserved in his name by person or persons unknown. Arnold and Dahl came together in that room to compare notes about their strange experiences, after which the United Press International apparently received a verbatim transcript of the entire meeting. So the room was bugged. Harold Dahl had also been visited by a man in black a mere 24 hours after his UFO sighting. Thus, this, along with the mysterious advance booking of the hotel room where Dahl met with Arnold, the apparent bugging of their room, and the release of the transcripts of their conversation to the UPI, are extremely good evidence in support of the hypothesis that both Dahl's and Arnold's UFO sightings were somehow arranged or known about in advance. If this were not the case, how could such a well-designed plan to exploit the reactions to those sightings, obviously requiring extensive resources and a great deal of coordinated effort, have been put into action so soon after the events themselves? Somebody knew about it. Peter Levenda, however, claims that the appearance of the man in black to Dahl and the recording and release of Dahl's and Arnold's conversation in the hotel room were evidence of a government effort to discredit their reports. Okay. Certainly the threats made by a man in black would make anyone think twice about revealing what he'd seen, but could this messenger's appearance not be equally well explained as an attempt to lend credibility to those reports? What could be more likely to convince someone of the reality and serious import of a particular experience than a threat by a mysterious stranger of unfortunate consequences if that experience were ever revealed? Why leak the conversation of Dahl and Arnold to the UPI itself, unless the intent behind the leak was not to debunk UFOs, but to influence the public to believe in them? The debunking theory makes no sense. I mean, you don't send the story to the wire services because you don't want them to know about it. Come now. When I asked Mr. Levenda to explain his logic on this point, I received no reply. Maybe some of my readers can prevail upon him to throw greater light on his puzzling conclusions and offer a reasonable explanation for them. Peter Levenda's essential position in his communications with me appeared to be as follows: that there is no such thing as a deep state, that there is no way that such a social engineering program as I posit could have been maintained over generations because we are all just flawed human beings, human individuals who do not have sufficient spiritual discipline to carry out such plans, that rivalries among factions and their ephemeral nature preclude the cohesion necessary for a deep state to form, that it would have taken a conspiracy involving not only all branches and departments of government, but the governments of Russia and China too, to manage such a campaign of deception. But if long-term subversive agendas are impossible, then there could have never been a mafia, for example, filled with bitter rivalries, but maintaining its central criminal intent over many generations. Nor could a systematic government program to debunk the reality of UFOs, which is a central tenet of the disclosure movement, the UFO disclosure movement, nor could such a thing have been maintained over the past 70 years. And a coordinated effort between government branches and national governments would in no way be necessary to carry out such an agenda. A small group with good connections, sufficient resources, and an ongoing intentionality of purpose could easily have seeded the meme of an alien intervention to guide the human race. And the related meme of military and intelligence whistleblowers working against a government cover-up. And such a group would be much more effective if it operated clandestinely. If I have mischaracterized Mr. Levenda's position, I hope he will further elucidate the thinking behind the short paper he sent me in rapid response to my analysis of the Netflix series, the one entitled The Problem with Any Grand Narrative of UFOs, which I promised him I wouldn't post or directly quote from. At this point in time, the three major players in the disclosure movement appear to be the To the Stars Academy, the Exopolitics Institute, directed by Michael Salla, who claims to be in ongoing diplomatic contact with extraterrestrial entities, and the organization headed by multimillionaire aerospace CEO Robert Bigelow, who might be described as the Jack Parsons of the 21st century. There may in fact be a rivalry between Salla's group and To the Stars for influence in the disclosure movement, as witness a photograph posted in 2018 on the Exopolitics website as part of an article entitled, Is Tom DeLonge's To the Stars Academy a Deep State Operation? The photo shows Levenda standing next to Tom DeLonge and none other than John Podesta. In addition, WikiLeaks turned up emails available on their website between DeLonge and Podesta on the subject of UFOs, while Podesta was campaign manager for Hillary Clinton in 2016 in the 2016 presidential race. On the other hand, one of Salla's videos reveals the existence of a coalition of good aliens working for positive world government in partnership with Donald Trump. Is To the Stars, in some sense, the occult wing of the Democratic Party? Does the Exopolitics Institute represent or hope to appeal to the Trump faction of the Republicans? Levenda's name also appears on the WikiLeaks website in an email from Tom DeLonge to Podesta, not in the body of the email, but in an attached PDF of DeLonge's and A.J. Hartley's book on the subject of arcane technology, Secret Machines, S-E-K-R-E-T machines, for which Levenda provided the afterword. The theme of UFOs is woven suggestively but inconclusively throughout the book. So, how are we to explain the many obviously absurd stories and propositions that cluster around the UFO phenomenon, several of which I have pointed out in the chapter of my book dedicated to analysis of top secret UFO projects declassified? I mean, somebody doesn't just put an ad in the paper and say, secret government classified documents available to whoever wants them. The guy shows up and say, yeah, here, take them off my hands, and they're cluttering up the garage. He doesn't hide his identity. It's just this ridiculous story. And I love this. My favorite is Philip Corso. He's puttering around on the airbase, and some shipment comes in, secret ship, and says, well, I'm going to go and check this out because I'm, officer of the day, so I get a chance to do it. And he goes in and he picks a wooden packing crate at random out of all the crates. Says, what's in this thing? He pries it open. And, what do you see? An alien corpse. No guard, no attempt to preserve the corpse. And no bad consequences for him later because he ends up working at the White House in later years. So, let's just get it through our heads. We have been sold a boatload of crap around UFOs. It's a real phenomenon. It's undeniable. But these stories, separate them from the question of whether UFOs are real or whether you're a true believer, a debunker in the reality of UFOs. I accept them entirely. They are 100% real. But these stories are absurd. Okay. My theory is that the powers that be have been playing a double game, overtly suppressing potentially available information on UFOs while covertly promoting a belief in them. And of course, attaching their own self-serving spin to the various revelations. Certainly, the power of the UFO myth to influence mass belief must have powerfully impressed itself upon the social engineers after Orson Welles' famous 1938 radio hoax about a Martian invasion of Earth. I believe that the military and intelligence communities, finding themselves powerless to either explain or control the UFO phenomenon, likely decided that the next best thing would be to use it for their own ends, that is, for engineering a collective transformation of human belief. The act of issuing contradictory claims, which started with Roswell, it comes out in the papers, that the saucer was crashed and it's been found, and a couple of days later, no, it wasn't a saucer at all, it was a weather balloon. So it may go back that far, who knows, but contradictory claims. The act of issuing contradictory claims works to create mass cognitive dissonance, fragmenting consensus reality and making the populace vulnerable to manipulation and to the acceptance of the most outlandish and destructive ideas, with the masses unable to think critically and trained to respond only to momentary impressions. Our rulers, who somehow seem to believe that they can maintain their grasp on objective reality while destroying it for everybody else, while destroying it for everybody else, have now positioned themselves to dictate what consensus reality shall be. The very denial of the reality of UFOs over the past 70 years has actually worked to promote the belief in them, especially if this denial is enforced by the men in black who threaten us with dire consequences if we ever reveal what we saw. How could UFOs be unreal if the powers that be are so worried that we might find out about them, we reason? It's a reliable technique, and when the social engineers finally let us believe that we have forced them, after 70 years of struggle and sacrifice, to reveal what they know, will we be able to evaluate their revelations critically and possibly even reject them? It's not likely, since they have manipulated us into demanding the very illusions that they planned to sell us all along. How could we refuse? In other words, the disclosure movement exactly fits the profile of a controlled opposition. Now, some may counter that at one point that the practice of publicly denying while covertly promoting the belief in UFOs was a necessary deception. A necessary deception in order to slowly acclimatize the population to the shocking reality of extraterrestrial and/or interdimensional alien encounter in such a way that final disclosure would not create social chaos and mass panic. Perhaps this was one of the justifications that was floated during the planning stage of the alien disclosure deception. However, since the public elements of the Pentagon UFO report to Congress in 2021 reveal no more than what could have been known and already was known to many as early as 1947, the year of the supposed Roswell crash and the UFO sightings in Washington state by Kenneth Arnold and Harold Dahl, why did this so-called acclimatization need to be stretched out over a period of more than 70 years? The answer is it didn't. What did require this extended time period was the crafting and collective implementation. Let me do that again. What did require this extended time period was the crafting and collective implantation in the mass mind of a particular myth about the true nature of UFOs, a myth whose central dogma, which has already begun to emerge, is that the UFO aliens, not God, were our creators, that they have functioned all along as the spiritual and evolutionary guides of the human race. As one Mary Rodwell tells us in Top Secret UFO Projects Declassified, we have there the aliens' DNA. We are, if you like, an intelligently designed species with perhaps as much as 12 different species of non-human intelligence with their DNA. In other words, what we are being treated to is nothing less than the inauguration of a UFO religion. The aliens, not God, are our creators, and they are our spiritual guides. If that isn't a religion, I don't know what you call it. The swindlers, whoever they may be, who are trying to sell us this boatload of garbage, act as if they believe that all the great religions of the earth were founded by con men like themselves, but that they, armed with the blessings of modern technology, can now do even better. Anyone, however, who tries to justify the acceptance of deceptive claims for some supposed higher purpose, who willingly places his or her faith in authorities who are known to be lying, or who knowingly issues such lies him or herself, is already a defeated and enslaved human being. People who have strayed this far from the truth, who have placed their entire faith in deception because they foolishly believe that deception will never deceive them, will have a very hard time returning to that truth, presuming that they can somehow conceive of a desire to do so, which at this point does not seem very likely. Furthermore, if we believe or want to believe that the human race was created through genetic engineering by a group of sallow, emaciated, sexless, corpse-skinned aliens instead of by a God who, as absolute reality, is the source of all life and all existence, we define ourselves not as human beings, but as soulless machines, as dead matter walking. Self-respect becomes inconceivable, human dignity a fading superstition. We despise ourselves. We think we are no better than that. No wonder we now look to the skies as our enemy, a vast void filled not with angelic intelligences whose emblems are the wheeling stars, but with annihilating gamma ray bursts and monstrous stellar explosions. No wonder we seem to almost hope that the Earth-killing asteroid will soon arrive to end our miserable existence. We are ashamed and horrified by what we have done to the Earth, by what we have done to ourselves. The aliens whom we now pretend to place our hopes in are nothing other than the visible expressions of that shame and that horror. Dr. John E. Mack, Pulitzer Prize-winning Harvard psychiatrist and author of the book Abduction, recounts 100 cases of human abduction by aliens, and many of whose victims he personally treated, and lists among the effects on them of such unfortunate encounters, quote, physical and psychological scars of their experience, ranging from nightmares and anxiety to chronic nervous agitation, depression, even psychosis, to actual physical scars, puncture and incision marks, scrapes, burns, and sores. He informs us that the alien abductors routinely subject their victims to terrifying and humiliating medical-like procedures. They also voyeuristically view them performing sexual intercourse, or themselves have intercourse with them. He speaks of broken marriages and alienation of affection between parents and children as among the more common after effects, and says that negative physical and psychological effects persist even in cases where spontaneous healing of chronic or incurable diseases occurs. And lest Dr. Mack be suspected of some sort of narrow-minded anti-alien prejudice, the astounding fact is that he thinks that their influence on humanity by and large has been good. Are these the beings we deem worthy to act as our spiritual guides and teachers? If we are to be judged by the deities we worship, then woe to the sector of the human race who follow the alien gods. Be that as it may, I believe that in the alien disclosure deception, I have provided ample evidence for the existence of a long-term mass deception and social engineering campaign centered on the UFO phenomenon. For myself, I have reached the firm conviction that such an agenda exists, and if it does, it can only be described as an outrage. It is nothing short of a crime against humanity. Based on this conviction, I hereby issue a challenge to the Stars Academy and to any other interested players in the UFO disclosure movement to dispute any of my facts or find any flaws in my arguments, since both objectivity and simple courtesy make it necessary for me to admit that I might be wrong. The premises I argue from, which are the reality of God and the primacy of the metaphysical order, are not a subject for dispute because no premise ever is. Axioms are the foundations for arguments, not the products of them. Nonetheless, if those I challenge can point out any factual or logical errors in my view of the UFO phenomenon and the human response based upon it, the human response to it, based on sound reasoning and solid research, then I will gladly alter my position. So, attention, potential opponents. The ball is now in your court. And I would like to remind the listener, the viewer, that all of this contains, a little bit of what is in my book, The Alien Disclosure Deception, The Metaphysics of Social Engineering, available through Amazon. So, thank you. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim.